What's going on, everybody? I'm excited to be able to speak to you this morning. If you can believe it, we've been meeting virtually and quarantining for over 2 months, and I think it's starting to make people a little bit crazy. Most of us have seen people buy irrational amounts of toilet paper. We've realized most of the country should probably retake statistics, but I've heard of nothing more egregious than what my brother recently witnessed. Him and my parents share an Amazon Prime account. And recently he was looking for something to watch on Prime Video, and he was scrolling and he noticed in the recently watched section, this movie had been watched in its entirety. The Triumph of the Tomato. That's what we've come to. The Triumph of the Tomato. When he told me about this, I had so many questions, right? Like, what was in Amazon's algorithm that it decided, you know what, I bet these people would like to watch a movie about fruit growing? Like, did it factor in their whole food purchases? Or like, what movies were passed on before they selected this one? You know, I just imagined my dad scrolling and being like, nope, that doesn't look good. Oh, The Triumph of the Tomato. That's going to do it. Speaking of fruit, as I transition, as a church, we recently read the book of Galatians, and I want to talk to you about the last fruit of the Spirit listed in Galatians chapter 5, and that's the fruit of self-control. Today, we're going to define self-control as the ability to recognize and choose the important thing over the urgent thing. Wouldn't you love to always correctly make that decision? Always recognizing and choosing the important thing over the urgent thing? What would your life look like if you had that skill mastered? Self-control is a virtue that I value, that I've been studying and striving for on a personal level. It's also something that I regularly feel deficient in, and it's something that I ask God to grant me on a daily basis. So hopefully I can share with you a few things that I feel He has taught me recently. Most of the research I reference today will be from this book called Willpower by Roy Baumeister and John Tierney. I highly recommend it if you are interested in the latest research on willpower. It's super interesting, it's enlightening, and it is relevant. I also reference a few things from various Timothy Keller sermons on the subject. So as it turns out, I am not the only one who feels self-control is a weakness. In fact, among the 24 character strengths surveyed by researchers to over 1 million people around the world, self-control was ranked dead last as the one people were least likely to recognize in themselves. Conversely, when people were asked about their failings, a lack of self-control was at the top of the list. This problem is not unique to adulthood. Some of you may have heard of the marshmallow experiment done by Stanford researchers in the 1960s. In this study, they took preschool-age kids and they put them in a room with a singular marshmallow. And they told them, you can eat this whenever you want, but if you don't eat it for 15 minutes, I'll come back and I'll give you a second marshmallow. As you can imagine, there's a wide range of outcomes, right? Some ate it right away, some waited, nibbled a little bit, and then failed, and just a few were able to hold out the whole time. There's actually a lot of videos on YouTube of this experiment, and it's quite entertaining to watch. It's so fun to watch the kids, just the genuine struggle in their face as they desperately want to eat this marshmallow, but they know they can't do it. In fact, recently one of our members, Hannah Fridley, actually did a version of this using M&Ms with her 3-year-old daughter, Sarah Kate. Check it out.
Look at all of this candy. Do you want some?
Yeah.
It's M&Ms. Alright, now look. Mommy's gonna go to the bathroom and don't eat them. And when I come back from the bathroom, I'll give you some, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so don't touch them until I get back, okay?
Okay.
Can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be right back. Don't touch them, okay?
Okay.
Don't touch them. I'll give you some when I get back, okay?
Okay. Not yet. Foremost. Comes back. Great, that's a lot of ants.
Wow.
Can you relate to Sarah Kate's struggle? She struggled, but she held out, which is pretty impressive for a 3-year-old. Interestingly, researchers actually followed up with the kids from the original marshmallow experiment in adulthood. And the kids who had held out for the entire 15 minutes, on average, scored 210 points higher on their SATs. They earned higher salaries and had lower body mass indexes in adulthood. Looking pretty good for you, Sarah Kate. So we know that self-control is a problem, but why is it such an acute problem? One reason is because we have more access to temptation now than any time in history. Think about it. What would it have been like just to be a farmer, 100 years ago? What kind of access to vices would you have actually had? If you wanted to overindulge on food, you'd have to, churn your own butter and OD on corn and potatoes. Right? If you wanted to be lazy, there was no TV, no internet. And not to mention, if you wanted to be lazy, you wouldn't eat. And so it was certainly available to them, but nothing like it is today. Think about today. Want to overeat? Click, delivered to your door. Want to watch pornography? Click, it's on your phone. Want to numb your mind with endless entertainment? Click, it's curated to your taste. And the next episode will start without you even having to click again. There was a study done recently in Germany where 200 men and women were asked to wear beepers that went off at 7 random intervals throughout the day. And what they had to do was they had to report if they were just currently dealing with a desire or had just recently dealt with resisting a desire. As it turns out, you spend about 1/5 of your waking hours resisting temptation. 3 to 4 hours per day. What a massive bombardment on your mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. Solomon captures what it's like to not have self-control in Proverbs chapter 25, starting in verse 11. He writes, "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." A city without walls in ancient times would have been just a complete disaster. Being attacked and plundered wouldn't have just been a risk, it would have been an inevitability. If you lived in a city without walls, you would have lived in a constant state of fear and insecurity. Without walls, there can be no order, no economic growth, and no city. Look at Nehemiah's reaction when he learns that Jerusalem's walls have fallen in Nehemiah chapter 1, starting in verse 3. He says, "They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted before the God of heaven." Nehemiah goes on to make it his life's mission to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and restore honor to his people. Let me ask you a question. Do you feel like your life is like a city with broken down walls? Are you defenseless against inevitable chaos? Maybe you don't feel like all your walls are completely broken down, but you have a few areas that are weak spots in your self-control. The thing about a wall is it only takes one area that's not fortified and an army can invade your city. As you examine the weak spots in your wall, I want to encourage you just to look deep. Sometimes I think we can just look at the big addictions of, alcohol, drugs, or things of that nature, but we don't realize that there are other things that are less obvious that are controlling us. Let's take, for example, constant anxious thoughts. Do you let the news dictate your mood or how your day goes? Or maybe you have an idol in your life of caring too much about what people think, and it causes you to constantly be anxious about your reputation. Or maybe you don't have self-control of your time and attention span, so you're always late, you're unreliable, and it's making you stagnant in your career. What about anger? I know for me, I can get too easily frustrated about something small, and I can't let it go, and it bothers me for way longer than it should. As an aside, I want to say something to the men about anger, and something to consider. Sometimes in our marriages, I think we can accuse our wives of being too emotional, right? But all the while, we're easily set off, and we often speak harshly to them. Anger is an emotion. So if you are constantly letting anger control you, are you not the one who's being too emotional? Okay, so how do we solve this problem? How do we grow in our self-control? I think you might find the answer counterintuitive. Let's read in Titus chapter 2, starting in verse 11. He writes, "For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age." Did you catch that? The key to having more self-control is to better connect with God's grace. Look back at verse 1. It says, "For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people." It, referring to God's grace, is what teaches us to say no and to gain self-control. But what does grace have to do with self-control? Allow me to read you a quote from Timothy Keller on the subject. He writes, "Very simply, when you understand grace, it smashes your idols. It destroys the pull on you and frees you to love and serve the Lord. The heart of grace is the good news that you are forgiven, loved, and accepted by God through faith in Jesus Christ. No matter who you are or what you have done, God looks at you and says, 'You are my son. You are my daughter.' He loves you because of your connection to his son, Jesus Christ. Now, what that immediately does, whether you feel it or not, is it destroys the control that your idols have on you. Your idols say, 'Serve me, and I will give you peace, acceptance, and security.' But a Christian can truthfully reply, 'I already have all of that in Christ.'" Let's read another verse to illuminate this idea in Proverbs chapter 18, starting in verse 10. It says, "The name of the Lord is a fortified tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale." In ancient times, when there would be an impending attack, someone on the city wall would ring a giant bell or blow a horn, signaling to all the people outside of the city walls to hurry and run back and get behind the walls for safety and security. You see, stress forces us to run to our true security. In this proverb, the rich run to their wealth as their form of security. They imagine it a wall too high to scale, but they are running to a false security. They think that their wealth will comfort them, and it may temporarily, but ultimately, their wealth will fail them. It cannot provide meaning, it cannot keep them from death, and it cannot provide true happiness. We are a society of self-medicators. When we get anxious, when we get stressed, we run to something to give us short-term relief. We run to something to make us feel better. It's why we crave high-fat, sugary foods at night. We want that hit of dopamine to dull the pain, even if the pain is just a pain of boredom. It's why internet pornography is a $100 billion worldwide industry. It provides a hit of short-term relief in the form of brain chemicals. It's why we use entertainment as a numbing drug or chase likes on social media. It all gives us a temporary rush, an escape, an imaginary wall. Neil Planting wrote an article called "The Tragedy of Addiction," and I think it's really insightful. In it, he listed the steps that one takes towards addiction. He says, first, you use something to cope with the pain. Then that thing you use to cope causes an additional pain in your life. Then you use more of the original thing to cope with a new pain, at which point you are stuck in an ever-increasing cycle. What do you run to when life is hard? What are you using to self-medicate? What are your imaginary walls? While you consider these questions, I want to give you two practicals to help with self-control. While it is a fruit of the Spirit, we also have free will. And as we mature as Christians, we constantly need to mind our gaps and fortify our walls. Let's look at some advice from Jesus from his Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 27. "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." Jesus is saying that if there's something in your life that you keep falling prey to over and over and over again, you would be much better off just getting rid of it altogether. And we know this, but we don't do it. Why don't we do it? There's been a lot of studies that show that we as humans, we hate losing our optionality. We will procrastinate and do everything in our power to keep as many options on the table as possible. It's the fear of missing out. The idea of making the wrong choice and losing out on something better pains us to no end. And so often we opt to keep with our options open, even if we'd be better off just making a decision and sticking with it. One example of this is the continued rise in the age that people are getting married. One reason for this is because the pool of possible mates is just growing and growing with social media and online dating websites. And this creates a pickiness and a set of unrealistic expectations. And so because of the fear of missing out on the perfect person that doesn't actually exist, people just keep swiping indefinitely and end up staying single for longer. How does this relate to self-control? There are certain back doors in your life that just need to be shut off and sealed altogether. The eye needs to be gouged out. The hand needs to be cut off. If you keep looking at stuff on your phone that you shouldn't, get rid of your phone. Get a flip phone. If you struggle with gluttony, empty your pantry of sugar. If you keep procrastinating with social media, delete the app. You will live. And not only will you live happier. Why ask yourself to win a battle over and over again when you don't even need to engage in the war? The next practical is simple. Go to bed early and wake up early. When's the last time you made a bad decision at 6 a.m.? Right? No one wakes up at 6 a.m. and thinks, I'm going to go hit up a Chinese buffet. 6 a.m. I think I'm going to max out my credit card on Amazon. That doesn't happen, right? Bad decisions inevitably come at night, and there's a reason for this. Researchers have found that willpower is actually finite. And as you use it and as you make decisions throughout the day, it depletes more and more and more. So by the time it gets to be late at night, you might just not have any left. Jesus rose early. So should you. While these are good practicals, there's nothing more important than leaning on God. Let's go back to Proverbs chapter 18 as we close out. It says, the name of the Lord is a fortified tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. You know where the safest place in the city is? Even safer than just being behind the wall? It's a fortified tower. When Nehemiah went to rebuild Jerusalem, in the northwest corner he rebuilt the Tower of Hanel. Hanel in Hebrew means God is gracious. The next time you feel lack of self-control, the next time you want to use something to cope with the stress or a pain in your life, run to the fortified tower of Hanel. Run to God's grace and ask Him to offer you the fruit of self-control. It's not just a temporary relief, it's a lasting cure.